Sure. As the G20 presidency is currently with India, just to remind ourselves that the overall theme is one Earth, one family, one future. And I think in an interconnected world, mitigation or adaptation, both are equally important. But we are coming out of COP27 and the sort of rebalancing of bringing adaptation back to the table, as was discussed, is very relevant for India. If you look at our NDCs, both mitigation and adaptation are equally balanced. So in terms of adaptation from an Indian context, clearly, I come from the water sector, as you know, Shirin, and I've worked for many years globally on water. And I think it came up, mentioned about the port city in India. Water and climate are very closely connected. And if you look at water, it's either too little or too much or too polluted. And, so you've got floods, you've got droughts, and you've got pollution of groundwater. So again, it's critical. And, we're facing that in India. We are a water-scarce country. Surprisingly, we get the monsoon, which is there for about 8 weeks, but it all runs off. So we don't have enough storage. So how do we adapt to this? Just one sector. So increasingly, there's a focus on how to build resilient infrastructure. And water was just one example. But what we are trying to do is we are trying to identify the most vulnerable areas. So where the cities, coastal areas, food and agriculture, infrastructure. So it's important to have a vulnerability index, which is something which we have started doing, so we can prioritize areas for adaptation. But there are some very good examples. And as you know, India's got some big numbers, and we typically deliver at scale, whether it's on sanitation or drinking water. The state of UP alone, which is, if you look at population, is the 5th or 6th largest country in the world with about 250 million people. They've embarked on a very ambitious adaptation program, which you could call, it's a little bit of mitigation as well. How do you get farmers to move into more resilient and sustainable practices for rice, for example? Instead of using flood irrigation, they're now moving to direct seeding of rice, which obviously is going to take less water, but also gives you more productivity, gives the farmer a higher income. You've got to take care of the weeds, of course. So that's a big challenge. But that's one aspect of how adaptation is taking place at scale. Another area is along our coast, learning from the Indonesia and the Bali summit. The Prime Minister of India was also part of that visit. And we are now considering embarking on a major program of mangrove plantations along our 7,000 kilometers of coastline. So this one is going to be, so if we can get that right, obviously it's going to be very challenging. It's going to take a lot of financing, but it will also include livelihoods, particularly through Manrega, a rural employment guarantee program, and women will be major beneficiaries. So, that's a program, adaptation, which will benefit women in particular. The third aspect I wanted to mention is something which the Prime Minister announced at Glasgow, lifestyle for the environment. How can individuals and communities adapt to climate change, which is very, very real in India? Whether you're using less water or whether, you are using less electricity in an era of climate change. So that's a major program which will also feature in the G20. And of course, climate, environment, life, the energy transition are all major themes in the G20. But one point which we've always been emphasizing again, and where's the money? And so climate financing, the technology transfer will be important, but capacity building as well. So there are major challenges in India. The government, will do everything it can. It's got ambitious programs on adaptation as well. Obviously on emissions mitigation, that's another agenda, but they go together. I think climate change has got to be looked at holistically. And so in India, we are very cognizant of the reality of the now of the now. And we believe we are acting on it, and hopefully this message can resonate in the G20 as well.